Hey, welcome to this interview with David Massover. I'm Tom Stearns. Really excited to have David on for the next hour, about an hour. And quick introduction, David Massover is just a great guy. I was introduced to David through his book that was given to me by one of my mentors and friends, Peter Wayman, called Mastering Your Sales Process. And it just opened the world of sales to me. It kind of took all that, like sales is super complex, and kind of broke it down into a really nice, simple process. I still open it, it's dog-eared and flagged today. I went on to read Managing, I have that right, David? Managing
Yep,
Your Sales
managing
Process?
the sales process.
For managers. I read that after because I was managing a team. And most recently, David has released The Salesman's Guide to Dating, which is about dating, but also a lot about sales. And David today works with organizations on making their sales teams work a lot better. I think I got all that right, David. How'd I do?
Yeah, I try to make them work better. That's the goal for sure.
So anyways, thanks for joining us. Have a lot of great questions for David that we're just going to explore over the next hour. So stick with us. And I will jump right into it. You know, David and I did a webinar last year on how discovery helps closing faster, helps close deals faster. And it's a topic everybody talks about. So I want to ask David that question again. So how does good discovery close deals faster, David?
Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here. I love doing this kind of stuff in general, and it's always fun to do it with you. So thanks for having me on board. And yeah, I love the leadoff question because discovery is the heart of the sales process. If you kind of think about sales, the whole goal is get into a conversation, get out of the conversation successfully, and what comes in the middle is what you learn, and that's discovery, and that's what's going to make or break it. I think what I see a lot of people doing is thinking about discovery in a very one-dimensional way. You know, my job is to go in there and discover, as the name would imply. So they interview and they ask questions and they gather data. And I don't think anybody thinks this consciously, but the unspoken process they're putting themselves through is like, okay, I'm going to go and find out a bunch of stuff, and then I'm going to run back to my office and write the world's greatest proposal, and then I'm going to send it to the guy or the girl or whoever you're sending it to, and then I'm going to wait, and then I'm going to follow up, and then they're not going to have read it, and you know, like we've all been there, and it's just this churn that never goes anywhere. And I think a much more effective way of looking at discovery is, you know, starting with that. Obviously, you need to learn the situation, but first of all, it needs to be a conversation. And what that means is that you don't just want to be getting information. You want to also be sharing information iteratively in the context of the conversation. For example, instead of asking a question, getting an answer, and asking another question, you can ask a question and say something like, wow, you know, that's really interesting. We had a client who had a very similar situation just last month, and they tried the, you know, yabba dabba do solution to try to fix that. Is that something you guys have tried before, or does that sound like something that might work for you, or do you know what that is? Now, all of a sudden, it's not just an interview, but you're actually hearing from the client about how they're feeling about your situation. And if they say, yeah, we tried that and it didn't work, well, then don't put it into your proposal. But if you just ran back to the office, you wouldn't know that. And you'd put it in your proposal and it would be a roadblock. Or if they said, no, I don't know very much about that, explain it to me. Then there you are in the middle of discovery pitching, but you're not really pitching because you're just having a conversation and they asked you a question. So when you have this kind of an iterative, real conversation, you can actually get to the end of discovery and you've not only learned their situation, but you've also talked about some solutions. And that kind of naturally leads to saying, well, gosh, it looks like we've got a plan. What do you think? And that's a close. That
Yeah,
was a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, I think it's an important topic.
I agree too. And I think sometimes what is missing in discovery is there needs to be from the salesperson an interest in qualification. And by that, I mean, is this a fit, right? We're all anxious to make sales, and often we don't dig deep into, you know, does this really make sense for us? You know, and yeah, of course we want to close deals, but it's really, really important to ask the questions, to get at the drivers, to get at the how they make decisions at their organization, and really to size it up and to determine, you know what, this isn't really a great fit. You know, maybe we let this one go now. So that sometimes the discovery is like asking a bunch of questions on like how they could use what we sell, when sometimes we're missing the, you know, does it even mesh? Should we do business together? Maybe there's a better solution for them. It's a competitor's product. Maybe we don't really fit this particular market. You know, sometimes you get marketing leads, right, David? And marketing sometimes is like flypaper. It picks up a lot of you know, people that are out there searching. They get fed the sales, and it's really the salesperson's job to be like, you know what, this company's a little small. We haven't done business with a lot of companies this small or this large. You know, maybe we're not in our wheelhouse here. And, you know, ask the organization is like, do we really want to do business with this kind of customer? So qualification, I think, is sometimes missing from discovery.
Yeah, and you know, you can really hurt yourself if you don't do that, right? I mean, if you just charge right ahead with a client that's not a good fit because you're so eager to get the sale, you're going to spend a whole lot of time, get to the end of the process, and realize, gosh, this wasn't a good fit. Wouldn't have been great to figure that out, you know, a whole bunch of meetings and phone calls ago.
Yeah, yeah, that whole time to lose thing that I see organizations are tracking now. You know, you want to lose them early and often, so you don't burn lots of man hours. Just think about when you get into it. You know, if you got to demo your product and you got to bring in solution engineers and procurement, and you forgot to ask a couple of questions at the beginning. It's like, wow, we just went from, you know, a couple of hours of my time as a salesperson to I just burned, you know, 20 hours of our organization's time, as well as the potential customer's time, just to lose it later because we didn't ask better questions at the beginning and listen. So
Yeah, and I think you wind up having more credibility, not just with the prospect, which is kind of a moot point because they're not going to do business with you. I mean, they might later, but also with yourself. You know, if you really see yourself as someone who's a solution provider, that's very different than seeing yourself as somebody who tries to sell what you have to whoever's in front of you. And I think that our own personal self-image of who we are as salespeople is important, and it does come through. And in this kind of, you know, metaphysical, psychological, mystical stuff that I don't even pretend to understand, I think like dogs and babies, prospects get a feel for that. And if you're authentic and you're genuine and you're really trying to do the right thing while you're trying to sell your product, if it's a good fit, I think that comes across. And if you don't wind up getting the sale because you were authentic about it, you know, gosh, you know, it feels to me like this isn't a good fit. Does that sound right to you? Yeah, it really doesn't sound like a good fit. What a great time to ask for a referral, because now
mm,
you've really clearly defined who it is that you're targeting. And, you know, well, gosh, maybe you know somebody else who might be a good fit for our product now that you know what a stand-up person I am.
yeah, yeah, respect. And, you know, that's something to, this is this is a slight digression from what we're talking about here, but sometimes people think way too short term, right?
Mhm.
You and I are, I think I've got a little more gray than you do, but I think we're up there, and our careers are long, right? And reputation, these relationships, especially with LinkedIn, I mean, they can last a lifetime. But so, like everything we do as salespeople, we need to be thinking about the long term. So you walk away from that deal. Now you've earned the respect of that person, and you're probably connected with them in LinkedIn. And there's, you know, there's a potential eventually to have some kind of relationship or referral. It's a lot like some of the tactics I think, you know, we do in sales, or I hope we don't do in sales. My One of my pet peeves are the connect with everybody on LinkedIn and then immediately try and pitch something,
Yeah.
right? And look, I'm an advocate of cold calling, of cold emailing, and texting at a certain level. But all these things are a dance, and the medium matters. You know, each social channel. So you know, I'll see a rep send 100 connections and be like, yeah, I got 3 leads out of it. I'm like, yeah, but what about the other 97?
Yeah.
Right? Have you burned relationships? Your career is long.
Yeah.
Every career decision, I think, should be um, thoughtful, right? So
Yeah.
what does this mean long term? So,
And they're making it tough for everybody else, right? Because if people are sending out 100 garbage connections or 100 garbage emails or 100 garbage cold calls, then every subsequent cold call or email or message that comes through is kind of tainted. And that one might be one that has value for the customer, but the customer is like, man, I'm not taking any more connection requests because somebody's going to spam me. So, we're a community here. Let's keep the planet clean for all kinds of different things, including legitimate sales efforts.
yeah, yep. Let's kind of shed that persona of like the sleazy sales guy. That's not who we want to be. Let's use good tactics. So shift gears a little bit here, Dave. I got a question for you. We both, I think, have coached individual reps on a somewhat regular basis. And, do you think that a good rep can succeed in a bad or poorly run system?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's just more friction. I mean, I think a good rep is let me qualify that. So when I started selling, which was a long time ago, I have my share of gray hairs too. Um, Sales seem to be a little bit more, or salespeople in some organizations had the ability to be a little bit more independent. It was just starting to change when I got into sales, but it used to be, when I had my first commission only sales job in an organization, it was like I hit my numbers, my sales manager left me alone. And I would just pack up my briefcase and go out and do my thing and work at my desk, and I hit my numbers, and there was a lot of independence. And I think that a solid rep really dictated their own time and dictated their own schedule and dictated their own tasks. I think fast forwarding longer than I care to admit to the current environment, there's a little bit more structure around most reps, and there's a little bit more of the organization that kind of dictates what they do and how they do it. It's a generalization, but in overall, I think that's probably true. But even with that, I think a really strong rep is going to find a way to succeed. That's what makes them a strong rep. Unfortunately, if they're in a bad sales organization or a poorly run sales organization, or they have a bad manager, or all of the above, or some combination of the above, there's just a lot more friction. So I actually had someone who just finished, an individual rep who just finished a coaching program with me. So it wasn't through the organization. He came to me individually. And he just sent me an email on, I think like maybe Sunday or Monday. He's like, David, I just finished Q1. It was the strongest quarter I ever had. And, your stuff was great. And I'm on fire, and I'm awesome. And I'm number one on my team, and I'm leaving. He finally got this confidence that like, wow, I really know how to do what I'm doing. Why should I waste it in this organization that is giving me so much grief? And he had shared some of that with me when we were coaching. And that's what I think the risk is for the organization. Yes, your good reps can succeed anywhere, but why should they? And if you create a poor environment, then one of the risks you have is your best guys are just not going to want to be subjected to that.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? It's so, at least in New England here, it's so competitive, and the organizations that get that know how to build a good system, a career path, they retain reps. They give them a, hey, we're going to train you to do this job, and you're going to do this for a certain amount of time. And in my experience, the younger folks that are hitting sales, they want to succeed. They want to be taught how to succeed, and they like to see where they're going, right? So you build a great system, and now, you're making an efficient use of your spend, of your people. It takes a long time to, I think, really learn your product and your buyer. So you get an SDR, teach them all that over years. And you have the mentality, it's like, they know that they'll eventually become an AE or a manager. Then you're going to hold on to that person versus, we're going to grind them out, and, we don't care, if they leave on their own at some point. It's like, you can't do that around here anyways, and get good people.
Yeah, they leave.
They leave. Yeah. I'll see you later. But yeah, I think that I've heard this a few places. I don't remember where it originates, but then, you, in terms of coaching and training, like, you can leave your A players alone. They're in good place. They know what they're doing. Your C players, either kind of, work them out of the organization or give them a shot to move up, and then really focus most of your energy on the middle B players and coach them into A players. So I don't know why I went to that particular thing, but it always fascinated me. Do you believe in that, David?
I actually, I remember I learned that when I was interviewing a guy for a sales management job, must have been back 2001 or 2002. And I asked him, I said, how do you see the sales organization? You know, what's your kind of philosophical framework? And that's exactly what he said. He said, I cut it into thirds. With the top third, get obstacles out of their way. I love that. Just get, make their lives easier. Middle third, move them up into the top third. Bottom third, move them up or move them out. I said, that is just so clean. I don't know where he got it or where he came up with it, and I've heard it since, but that has just, even with my feeble old man memory, that has stayed with me over the decades.
Yeah, I think I've heard Steve Richard talk about that a lot. Again, I don't know where it originates, but he even had some math on how it just makes more sense, and that's sort of what I advocate today too. So related to this, let's talk a little bit about sales team success versus sales rep success. What do you think makes for a successful sales team versus the individual, like we were just talking about?
I've been using an expression over the last couple of months, and it sounds kind of smarmy, but it's so true that sales teams succeed when the salespeople succeed. There's kind of no two ways about it, and the reason that I like to use this is that very often the things that support salespeople aren't deployed as effectively as they could be, or the things that have the potential to support salespeople in their success aren't deployed as effectively as they could be. For example, how often do you hear about, or how often do you see in an organization that you might work with, a sales manager who is spending a very small fraction of their time, if any, really working with reps, as opposed to working for the organization, right? Working their dashboards and going to their meetings and representing the sales organization to the other departments, all of which is important. I'm not minimizing that, but it comes at the expense of really helping the salespeople succeed. And in a similar vein, you often see tools that are deployed in the same way. It seems as though many tools are purchased because of what you can get out of them. But what you can get out of a tool, like a CRM, for example, the data you get out of a CRM is a function of what goes into it. And the only way to get good data into a CRM is to really pay attention to what your reps are doing, design the tool to make their lives easy, make it a tool that's going to help them do their job better so that they want to use it. And if they're using it to actually do their job, then management gets everything that they want. You can't just buy a CRM that doesn't match and say, get your deals in the CRM or you're not going to get credit for them, because all you get then is extra administrative work and everybody hates the CRM. I'm posting about that in about 20 minutes, actually. But you see it everywhere. So I think that if somebody is tasked with, I need to make my sales team successful, the best results and the best decisions are going to start with, what can I do to help my reps sell better? And when decisions come from that perspective, obviously there's a lot more to it than just sales training or sales coaching or sales enablement or tools. But when whatever question you're asking starts with that, I think you're more likely to get to the right answer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. When I work with organizations, excuse me, like the first place I go, I'm like, is the system designed to help them succeed? Because often they'll be like, hey, do we have the wrong people? What are we not doing? And it's like, well, everything's kind of holistic. There's, I go in assuming that the product is solid, and I look at the system, and that's that combination of like, okay, what do you have for the skill set of the team, and what do you have for a manager, right, or leadership? And how are they focused on the success? And then the tech stack. I've got a favorite tech stack for like an SDR team, a different one for the AEs, and how it can make that team hum along. All that works together, and then skills, and of course, messaging. So
It seems like a lot of sales leaders approach this problem. Yeah, I don't want to generalize, but I've seen it so often that they want to know what the one thing is that they should fix. You know, should I get training? Should I get a tool? Should I get a new manager? Should I get different people? And you know, it's harder to kind of wrap your head around the whole, like, let's look at the big picture. Let's look at how things are connected together. But I think if you're not taking that perspective, you're never going to solve the whole problem, because it's never one thing. Well, I shouldn't say never. It's rarely one thing. I don't know that I've ever seen it be one thing.
Yeah, it's rarely one thing. Now you just brought something up, which is really the next topic that I found myself really passionate about lately, because I do a fair amount of, I do a couple of things. One, I try and fix teams, but then I also do a fair amount of sales training and sales coaching. Mm-hmm. And I constantly turn this over in my head. So I have my own opinion, but I'm going to ask you first. Does sales training actually work, David?
Yes, with a big asterisk.
Yeah, mine too. So what's that asterisk to say?
Well, you know, I think I spent some time doing a lot of individual coaching with not directed at organizations, but just I reached out to individuals and started doing a lot of coaching with them. And it was fun, because these were the kind of people that actually pull their own credit card out of their pocket and, you know, pay for it themselves. These were really the go-getters, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. But what I noticed was that there was a lot of times we would wind up talking about, I would wind up talking about similar things with many different coaching clients, because there are some similar issues that many people have. And you kind of have to break apart the learning process into concepts and into you know, applying it to a person's situation. And I think training, whether it's live or whether it's a book or whether it's a workshop that's live, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a one-to-many kind of a thing. That's a great medium for conveying concepts. You know, it felt bad to me that people were spending their money on time coaching with me to go over concepts that I was repeating again and again. I'm like, why don't I just write this down or make a narrated slide deck or something and send it to you? And then they could look at it, and then we could get on a call and talk about how it fit for them. And that's kind of the way I think about the balance between coaching and training. And of course, many trainings have elements of both. You know, there'll be a training that has a period of let's talk about a concept, and then let's workshop it, or let's role play it, or, you know, something like that. But I think training is important, because there are some concepts that need to be learned and understood as a basis for then applying it, personalizing it, you know, bringing it into focus for your specific situation. So they're two different tools with two different purposes. I think sales training alone, you know, if someone thinks they're going to fix their sales problems by once a year getting all their people into a room and having somebody stand at the front of it and talk to them, that's a bad use of that tool. But as a tool, it can be very effective if it's deployed properly. It's kind of like, you know, those old Saturday morning cartoon commercials. You know, it's an important part of this complete breakfast, but it's not the only part, you know?
Nice. That's a nice analogy. Yeah, it's when the organization says, hey, you know, we're going to bring in this group, and you're going to get trained at the quarterly sales meeting or the national sales meeting, or we're going to send you to training for that. And I've been that trainer before. And if you're disconnected from the organization, it's like, man, you're wasting your money. The way I think I agree exactly with what you said, is that the way it really can work is that you have a methodology that starts at the top that leadership buys into, and then the directors and the managers, and then the training is integrated with that. Mm-hmm. In the sense that it's like, hey, this, you know, we're going to bring in a sales trainer to talk about prospecting methodology, but the leadership and the managers and directors understand that too. Or attend the training and really get it at a deeper level. And then there's got to be reinforcement, right? It's got to be like, okay, we're going to go over these concepts, and then we are going to reinforce these. The model I like is that I'm a huge advocate of the call recording software and coaching to recorded calls. in my experience, I've told this story 9 million times, but when I had a team years ago before these technologies existed, I went to my daughter's swim meets on Saturday, plugged in maybe these same earbuds, and well, no, I guess they've upgraded since. And I would listen, 8 hour day. My daughter swam for about 2.5 minutes total. I would listen to my team's calls and take notes, and then we'd listen as a team. That was the most effective way to improvement I've ever heard, and for marketing too, because marketing would listen to these calls. So but it started with like, okay, we're going to train you on a methodology for handling that call, that discovery, whatever stage it is, and we're going to go over that, and then we're going to listen to the real stuff weeks after, and then coach to that, and then the manager has to be a total part of that system. I was the manager at the time. Now I get plugged into these teams. I do a little of this while I'm trying to fix a system.
Yep.
And get the manager to be like, look, you got to do this. The reps got to do it for themselves. That's the only way to make that training you invested in for that stick over time. You got to be one unit, and you can pay for a day of that, and then you got to reinforce it.
Yeah, so. I always thought of it, I guess you could think of it as, training is kind of like the meat in the sandwich, right? Like at the first, you got to do some consulting and understand what's going on. And then maybe you can do some training to get that across to everybody. But then afterwards, there needs to be some real one-on-one coaching to apply it. So, I think all of the tools are important. And again, using that word that you brought up, holistic, you really want to look at and not, what can I get across in a, in a half-day training at a kickoff meeting or whatever. But really, what kind of change am I trying to impact, and what are the different directions I want to attack it from, and the different levers I want to use, and the different tools I want to use. And I just think generally with whatever you're doing, you're going to have a better outcome if you take a more holistic approach like that.
Yeah. And going back to something you said earlier too, the manager's time invested in the coaching is critical. We've both seen that scenario, right? The manager that's all their time dealing with management meetings, no time to coach, no time to listen, no time to sit there and go through and actually read maybe the emails that your team's sending, coaching to that. If you're not doing that, then, it's just never going to work. Your managers need that kind of acumen and desire to do it.
Yeah, the job should be, how can I help my salespeople sell more? And if you're not really involved in doing that, it sounds like a snarky question, but what are you there for? If the job is managing the dashboards and going to the meetings, it's like, that's really great, but you're one of the strongest salespeople on the team, and you're responsible for the team. So there's got to be some time spent making sure that the guys on the team and the people on the team are being effective.
Yeah. And don't be insecure about it, right? So like some folks get promoted and they're like, well, I don't know enough to coach these people. There's lots of tactics, right? Like I love to be a little tactical in these discussions. So a great tactic, if you're a new manager, is that have a meeting with your team and play some live calls and bring a couple of senior reps. So if you're managing an SDR team, bring in a couple of experienced account executives and even a marketer or all the marketers, and listen to the calls and let them coach each other, right? Let and sit back and learn. So that's sort of how a lot of what I learned is we would listen to calls as a group, and the senior reps would coach, and everybody learned from that experience. So that's one way to do it. When you have your huddles, bring an account executive or some other veteran in, or bring an outsider or a coach or a third party, and just, get the help. You don't have to be, just because you're the manager, it doesn't mean you have to know everything. You just got to want to like, let's mentor each other. Let's coach each other. I'm also a big advocate of like the sort of pod structure, where younger reps, SDRs are on a territory with like a consistent amount of AEs. The whole like round robin thing where I got one SDR working with 100 reps. I don't like that very much, because if you create a team structure, then the more veteran reps are going to mentor the younger ones. So now you've got another sort of coaching, mentoring relationship that can exist in the organization. Everybody wins.
Yeah, I sometimes ask potential clients, what are you doing to make sure that best practices, things that are happening well, are being learned and shared across the team. And I so often get a blank look. It's like, there are different people doing different things well. Why not cross pollinate?
Yeah.
Why not facilitate that?
Yeah, it's hard. I think one of my frustrations or failings is probably a better way to look at it, is that when I work with a team and I think I get it stood up and going, and I start to back away, as I should, that my job is temporary, and things start to teeter, right, or they start to fall apart, and then I feel like, well, I failed somehow. I didn't set it up. I didn't maybe teach enough of like, look, you got to build these, cross, like these concepts didn't stick.
Hmm.
Which goes back to a lot of, like, I guess what's on my mind a lot is like how people learn.
Hmm.
And I get fascinated by that. I feel like I've learned that how people learn through experience versus maybe the science of like, is there, and I've read some of the science around, you train and then you practice, you sleep, you learn something, you work at it, you got to sleep for it to stick. And then you keep practicing it. Like, you got to keep working at it, because I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a rep and I'm like, we did this yesterday, or we just role played for 10 minutes. And then you got on a real call. You did nothing that we just practiced. Like,
Right.
I'm like, what have I done wrong? And so
Yeah.
I obsess about like, how do we get these concepts to stick? So how do you, let me ask you that, David, because maybe you can help me with my gigs, is that when you stand up a team and then you start to back away and it
Hmm.
starts to fall apart, does that mean that I've been too involved or haven't taught the right concepts? How would you assess that situation if I run into it? Never, once in a while,
Yeah, for that one rare time that it actually occurs. Um, I think ultimately, guys like us, we can't look at our job as limited to, I need to teach you skills. It's not enough. I think at the rep level, reps need to understand, what they need to do, how they need to do it, but also why. And I think that when you can really help them understand why, then as new things come across their plate, they're not having to remember what you told them, but they understand how it is that they're supposed to do something. That still isn't always enough, though. And I think that one of the best things that you can do for an organization, from a capacity like we have with organizations, is really create those kind of relationships, especially either peer to peer, senior to junior, or ultimately manager to rep, where these kinds of reinforcements are happening regularly. You talked about these meetings with the manager and the rep and the senior account exec. You throw in pizza every Friday at noon, and all of a sudden everybody wants to come and get their pizza. But all joking aside, you have to create a culture where this kind of ongoing development is just part of the infrastructure. Because if it's not part of the infrastructure, it's always going to fall apart. It's so, when I first started doing this kind of work, I would follow up with my clients 3 months, 6 months later, and like everything had gone back to where it was, and it's very frustrating. So I think you need to be deliberate about setting expectations for the organization you're working for, that it's a goal that ongoing development is going to be a part of the culture, and then part of the infrastructure you build has to reflect that. The hardest part, I think, is getting senior leadership to allow the frontline sales manager the time to do that,
Mm.
because it's they either want to see them selling. We're not going to go there, I think, but some people think that's a great idea, some people think it's a terrible idea. They're all over the map, arguments on both sides. And some people want them to be really involved on the management side, but I think you and I are both big advocates of they need to be involved in coaching as well. And if senior management can't really get behind that, I think it can be very challenging to create a culture in which there's ongoing development.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you've experienced. I mean, this is part of our discovery process, is that figuring out whether an organization can really change.
Mhm.
It's a big part of like my discovery process, is that, can are they interested in what I'm going to bring to the table, or are they looking for something like just training, right? So,
Yeah.
that's where I learn about my discovery process. More than once, I've closed a deal, which it was not the right kind of customer. And then it, either drags on and you got to fire them, or, they fire you or something like that. So,
Yeah, they want you to sprinkle the magic words on top of the salespeople while they don't change anything and they expect things to be different. And it just doesn't generally work that way.
yeah. Yep. So, speaking of how hard sales can be, I mean, there's a ton of sales content, right? Where it seems like there's lots of books about sales. There's lots of content to consume, lots of people out there talking about it, been around for a while, and yet it still seems really, really difficult. Like, why is sales and sales improvement so hard for so many?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I actually really, I torture myself over that. I really do, because like you said, I mean, there's so much good content. There's books, there's LinkedIn now. I mean, that didn't exist when I was starting out in sales. When I was starting out in sales, it was tough to find good content. Now good content is everywhere, and yet you go into a sales organization, and so many of the problems are so core and fundamental and basic. It is a bit of a mystery, and I don't know what the answer is. Um, when I work with organizations, I I find myself having to walk a balance between, kind of where they think they are and where they really are. And I always like to try to start with let's just start with some core fundamental basic questions. And very often when you start digging around at the core basic fundamental level, you uncover some things that are really problematic. And I think a lot of, my own hypothesis about the question is, I think a lot of salespeople, sales manager, and sales leaders believe that, they're kind of up here, and we should be dealing with really sophisticated stuff, and we should be getting, super tools and all this other stuff. But there's these cracks in the foundation
Mm,
where salespeople are not good at establishing value or articulating the problem, or they don't have solid business acumen, and they don't really understand the customers they're selling to, or they lack some basic skills in terms of effective outreach or qualification, as you discussed.
mm,
And so the only explanation that I can come up with is that's the disconnect. Is that there's a lot of information out there, but whether it's ego or pride or ignorance or self-delusion, I really don't know what, and I don't want to be condescending, but I think a lot of organizations need to kind of take a step back and say, listen, do we have a solid foundation here? Are we doing the basics well? And in my experience, most of my clients have some room for improvement there. And when they do improve, then they have a really solid platform to build up from.
mm,
But my own hypothesis is, people, for whatever reason, just don't start there. So, as one of my clients said to me, the problem isn't lack of information,
mm.
it's execution. And I think that was very insightful. And that's why I stole it from him and continue to use it today.
Yeah, so much of, I think, good sales goes back to your book, right? I think I liked so much about mastering your sales process is that I was a marketing guy for 15 years, and then I found myself running marketing and an inside sales organization, and my head was spinning, right? I had done, sales to the channel, when I ran marketing, but never, B2B, one-to-one sales. And then I read the book and I was like, oh, makes sense, right? It just you put it into those simple terms, and the blocking and tackling, right? It's
Yep.
so much, another, sales sports analogy. You can't do any talk about sales without it, but it goes back to what are the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Are you doing enough? Are you even reaching out to enough people? Are you reaching out to the right people? When you get them on the phone, are you asking them questions as opposed to fire hosing a pitch at them? Just kind of these little knobs. And I guess it's kind of what is a lot of fun about getting a new consulting gig, is that often it's like, I turn a couple of knobs, and wow, like big changes happen. Right?
Yep.
And then it's like, okay, now we got some of the fundamentals down, guys. Now we can start to now we can add some technology maybe that's going to speed that up even more. It's going to help you. Now you can listen to your calls and actually analyze them versus like making them like you weren't making any calls. Now,
Right.
now you can
Right.
make them. So all that kind of stuff I find really fun. But yeah, it really starts sometimes the basics, even a commission plan.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I know there's lots of theories on maybe salespeople could go to salary and stuff like this. But in my experience, it's like, show someone how they can make more money and they can get busier a whole lot faster.
I haven't ever met a rep that didn't like money.
Yeah, it's a rare thing out there.
Yep.
So next question. So you recently, I remember this post well, you recently posted about openings, call openings, and you got a whole lot of feedback.
Yep.
So from all of that feedback in your own experience, what's your best advice on how to open a call?
I think that, opening a call effectively starts well before you think about getting onto the phone. I think that one of the things I spend a lot of time working on with people is deeply understanding the problems that you solve for your customers. And it's one of those things where everybody talks about it and everybody believes they're doing it, and they're not. When I think we talked about this a little bit in the webinar that I did for your group back in October. When I ask people what problem do you solve, very often they'll answer with their product. Oh, we build websites for people. Like, that's not a problem. That's your product. Oh yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, we build websites that are really fast and beautiful and highly functional. It's like, well, that's not a problem. Those are benefits. Why does somebody even need a website or a better website or whatever it is that you're selling? What are they thinking when they're sitting in their chair, not thinking about websites, but thinking about, man, I've got this problem and it's bad and I'm getting heat for it and I need to fix it. When you can tap into that, then I think you've got the ammunition for an opening. And you want to structure it properly and you want to execute it properly and all that other stuff. But if you don't start by really getting clear about what are the problems that I solve for my prospect as they feel them from their perspective, not in terms of my product, not in the language that is in our marketing brochures, but that's in the language in their head when they're sitting in their chair being frustrated about the thing they need to fix. When your outreach efforts start from that perspective, I think you've got a much higher chance of engaging.
That's very good. And I think in today's day and age, you need to do some basic research on your particular customer, right? One, we should never call someone who's not a target, doesn't have the right title, role, or something like that. So easy. So getting the profile fit right is so easy. But trying to, understand something about them. Now, I think, a lot of reps mistake that I need to personalize an email or I need to personalize an opening with, I need to know something personal about them. That, yeah, sure, that's definitely helpful. But there's so many other nuggets and more important nuggets is if you can identify something about their business. That opening is universal, both in email, social, and phone. If you can find and say, hey, you know what? I noticed that when I looked at what you're doing in the marketplace, that there's some signals that this is not working right. And with, companies your size or other companies you may know, we've been able to solve that problem. That's the level of personalization that matters the most, right? Now it's like, hey, you can look at my profile and learn a lot about me, my personal interests, and sure, that's going to open a call nicely too. But once you get past that, then what do you know about my business? That's really meaningful. So sometimes I think personalization gets mistaken for like, hey, is the guy a Red Sox fan?
Right.
Versus what, I understand his business problem.
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember where it came from. I think it was from a really, really old book in the 20s. But there was this, or I don't remember because I read about it a couple of months ago. But I'm missing the reference. But it's the digital equivalent of when sales reps used to walk into an office and look around for a bowling trophy or a stuffed fish on the mantle and like, oh, you like fishing, I mean, it's the same thing. And I think some people, I guess, can execute that pretty well, and more power to them. And some things are definitely something you can connect on around. But I think a lot of buyers are pretty tired of that. I mean, by the time I came up in selling, it was a time when, yes, we would go out and have meetings, but they would never be in the client's office. Like there would always be like an office where you would meet the salesperson, like a little conference room, so that there were no stuffed fish and there were no baseball tickets or family pictures. Like, no, we're going to talk about business. So yeah, I think it's just the digital equivalent. I looked on your LinkedIn profile and saw that you like, Snickers bars. So I'm sending you one, and maybe that works, but yeah, that's how I always think about it.
Yeah, I think there's a level to that, and depending on where you're calling, I
Yeah.
have the benefit of working with a lot of reps that call all over the world. And, I talked to one guy last week and he's like, I've been calling into Texas and New York. Right. He's like,
Right.
if I don't shoot a little BS when I call Texas,
Right.
then I'm harming that relationship. If I shoot
Yeah.
any BS when I'm calling New York, then I'm harming that relationship. So
Yeah.
it's like two different strategies. I do know one thing, very tactical thing on the opening is that when you get whatever you're doing, when you make, at least at a cold call, that you have to get the customer talking as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Whatever that methodology is, if you do not pitch, do not go into a long monologue. They are not listening. You have to find a hook, find a question, find some way to get them talking in the first 15 or 16 seconds in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
If you do that, the whole tone is different. So
Yeah.
that whatever research you do, it's like, I think of it as like you're wading into the ocean. You need to wade into that conversation to go bigger and bigger on the phone. And then I think on email, it's a little different. It's like, yeah, you might need a little reference, definitely need a little personalization at the beginning, preferably about their business.
Hmm.
But then you got to get to what problem you're solving.
Yeah.
Funny how the mediums are different, very
Yeah. But the
different.
concept is the same, right? If ultimately, if the outreach isn't getting the prospect to think, I've got a problem, it sounds like this guy might be able to solve it, it's hard to get traction from there. I think ultimately it has to start there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't care. Why should they?
Right. Right. So get them listening, and then get them talking and listening as quickly as possible. And then then we get down to business very quickly. Yeah. Another simple thing, but often hard to execute. And there's so many little components that go into your tone of voice, um, your research. But anyways, another question for you, David. Objections. Another thing that endless amounts of content come out of this topic. But what's your methodology when you coach reps on how to deal with objections?
So I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's a recruiter. Um, I'll never forget because this came up, and he gave me something that I always stick to. And he calls this concept the border. I'm sure I've told you about the border before, but maybe I haven't. I'll tell you about it now. So the idea behind the border is that there's a very significant change in the tone of the overall conversation that you're having between a salesperson and a prospect when a proposal is put on the table. As soon as a price and an offer is on the table, the tone of the conversation changes. And I'm not making a judgment. It's not that it's good. It's not that it's bad. It's just all of a sudden kind of, okay, now we're negotiating the proposal. And it's in this kind of after the border period that objections come up. But if you think about objections, what they really are is questions. Because if they came up before you crossed the border, then they are just questions.
Hmm.
how much does it cost, or does it do this, or what about that, or can we fix this? Those same questions have a very, very different feeling on those different sides of the border. So yes, you need to be skilled at handling objections when they come. But if I was to give, one piece of advice to people about objections, is try to get as much of them answered during discovery as you can, such that when you finish discovery in the way that we discussed earlier, and it kind of seamlessly goes into like, well, gee, that seems like a great idea. What do you say we move forward with that? If you engineer it right, and it's never perfect, but if you engineer it right, you can kind of seamlessly go from the right kind of discovery with all of those trial solutions that we discussed, and with all of those objections that haven't become objections yet, and kind of just slide right into the close without even having objections. It's theoretical, because you're still going to go back and write up a proposal, and you're going to give it to them, and they're going to ask about it, and there's going to be some questions. But you can minimize the number of objections that you have by getting them addressed as questions on the friendly side of the border. I think that's the best advice about objections I ever received, and very effective methodology that I've taught ever since.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, at least in my experience dealing with a lot of different reps and teams, is that there's really two kinds of objections. It's almost like the word is misused, right? There's the objection that you just described. It's like, it's a legitimate objection that we need to address. And then there's the sort of, it's called an objection, but it's more like a pushback or a blow off that happens really early, right? Yeah, you have that first phone call and they say, hey, you know what, I'm not interested, send me something, I'm not interested, or, I prefer this other vendor, I'm not going to tell you that. Those kind of objections, right? Which are more like blow offs.
Mm-hmm.
And those, I think that in my experience, those kind of blow offs, your reaction to them is what matters more than having any kind of answer. So the legitimate objection where you have to address it is one thing. The blow off you're getting very early in a conversation, relationship, or meeting or something, is more about not overreacting to it, empathizing, hearing it, and then trying to get past it. So that when you get far enough into the relationship, now we've got a legitimate objection. Now we really need to approach that better. So,
yep. I usually teach that as, there's prospecting objections, and then there's deal objections, because just getting someone's permission to have that longer conversation is kind of a mini sale within the sale. And the dynamics are very different, and they're very compressed, and you do need to address that. But you actually raise a good point, because even with the deal objections, there's two different variations. One of them is, there's really a specific thing that I want to talk to you about, or that I'm concerned about, and it's clear and it's finite and it's defined. There's another kind of objection where it doesn't really matter what they say, because what it represents is, I'm not sure, or I'm not convinced, or I don't see the value. And a lot of times you'll get those kinds of objections, and you'll try to answer them directly, and it doesn't work, because it's not really about that objection. It's just that the person has not been convinced, as it were, that this is a good idea. And you need to recognize that, and maybe you moved ahead too quickly. And if you're able to, you got to be able to kind of step a few steps. It's kind of like, one of those board games, right? Go back 3 spaces and, try doing that earlier part again, because you skipped over something, and they're just not ready for you to close them yet. And the objection is just a signal of uncertainty.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well said. Well said. Well, that's all the questions I have for you, David Massover. This was enlightening. Thank you.
Oh, this has been fun. I always like talking about this stuff with smart guys like you, Tom.
Smart guy. Thanks. I've been called a lot of things, David, but
yeah, never that. Well, let me be the first.
I'll take it. So, hey, so thanks for joining on this discussion today, and let's have another one soon. This is really, really great, David. Thanks for joining.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tom. Anytime.
Thanks.